Thanks for being a part of our webinar today. This is the third in a series of 3 webinars that have to do with being more competitive, putting yourself in a spot to be able to write more business that TJ has organized for us. I'm really grateful for the effort he's put into this. And what we hope today is that you'll see some of the things that we talked about in the first 2 webinars will come together in this one. Specifically, I think from the first one when TJ was talking about EZLynx as a tool to get relatively quickly to the carrier where you can fine tune it. I think you'll see how TJ would go through a quote, because that's what we're going to do today, is go through an auto quote followed by a home quote. It'll mostly be a screen share there that TJ will do, and he'll lead us through.
All right, hello everybody. So just like to preface that this is kind of my process. You may do some of this. You may see something you want to kind of add to your repertoire or toolbox. All of that is okay. This is not meant to be the end all be all. It's just to kind of help us build a process for ourselves. So the first thing I want to do is just start an auto quote. Today, I'm not going to select any carriers. I might point out some things that you'll want to keep an eye on in the carrier specific questions, but just to kind of like keep it a little bit more efficient and focused, I'm just going to do kind of a not monoline, but a single driver kind of deal, just to keep it simple. Some of you may remember Teej Scoot. That's my quoting alter ego. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and use today. So on this first page is where you would select your carriers. As always with Firefly, we ask that you quote everybody you can. Obviously, if it's not a risk fit, you can deselect those carriers like Bristol West and stuff, so to kind of minimize some of the questions on that end. That is the rating tab. So this is the next tab, which is the policy info tab. For me, this is where kind of a lot of the magic happens with just starting to think discounts when I'm approaching my quote, and kind of speed and efficiency. The first thing I'll let you know, you can select this and select what carrier they're previously with. I'll be honest, it doesn't impact EZLynx one way or another. When EZLynx looks at this, they just want to know if there's a lapse or no lapse. So I typically just stick in the other standard, other non-standard realm just for speed. So if I know they're coming in with nationwide, it'll be other standard. If they're coming in with a Bristol West or foremost, I know it's other non-standard. Expiration date. Clearly, if somebody's expires tomorrow or the day after that, like recently, like in a recent way, you'll want to put that actual date in there. If I know they're a month or a couple months out, I typically just click the date and jump to the next month and click the last day. It does not have to be the exact expiration date because all of this info is going to pull on your prior carrier report in the carrier system. So I generally do this to give myself some leeway for the advanced quote discount because I'm constantly thinking discounts whenever I'm doing these quotes in EZLynx.
And I think part of the idea on that maybe, TJ, is the reason you might put it the next month and the last day of the month is just because it might take a couple weeks for an insured to decide. What you're not saying is, well, if it's 2 weeks out, it's good, so I'll put it out, 2 weeks and 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then, a week later they want to do it and you've lost, it's fallen off.
And if something bleeds over, it's a good point, Fritz. You can always come in and edit that date. Like if there is some, if there's more leeway, you could put 2 months out if you want, 3 months out. That's not going to matter as long as you don't create a lapse in EZLynx and then you get errors. Prior liability limits, I would always be accurate here. This can impact rate coming in. Whatever they have, I would put in there because it can even up to impact their eligibility for a carrier in some instances. Policy premium, I don't even put anything there. I usually stick to the orange boxes for the most part. Every once in a while, there's one that's not orange that you'll need to answer, but generally, I just stick with those for efficiency. Here's a prior carrier. You'll definitely want to be accurate there. That can impact rate. Years with continuous coverage, same thing. Those are going to get better rates when they show better loyalty. These last 3 boxes, credit check, always click yes. To avoid as many errors as possible, always click yes on that credit check and reporting. New policy term, we prefer 12-month. Helps with your end on servicing, helps with the client keeping that rate. And generally, all in all, is just easier. And the nice thing about clicking 12 every time is if a carrier only offers 6, it will fall back. It won't If you do 6 month, it'll do 6 month. Generally, it won't fall up.
Hey, there's a question too, TJ, that relates to this page.
Mhm.
Jeff Butler's asking, what would you put for prior liability limits if you don't have their deck page on hand? Any tips on that?
Uh, I mean, as with all insurance, you want to answer to the best of your ability. If it were me, you might just default to like 5,100 somewhere in there because it's not going to put them at state mins and it's not going to put them at the best. And when you pull your prior carrier report, you'll be close. What you don't want to do is like oversell it and be like, oh, they have 250, 500, and then all of a sudden you're chasing rate again. So I would
Hmm.
estimate low if it were me.
Yep. Okay.
Package, you're going to see stuff like this throughout the quote in a couple spots. If you're quoting auto and home, always click yes here. The difference between package and mono or multi-policy is essentially sometimes package shares a policy number, but it's the like good rate from the carrier. Not that multi-policy isn't. Um, Multi-policy is auto, home separately under the same roof. Now, there are carriers that do both. I think Westfield has a package with stricter underwriting guidelines. And then they have the multi-policy you can do to save some money, which is a little bit less harsh on the underwriting guidelines. And then you can do, well, they don't want monoline, but you can do monoline, but they don't necessarily want monoline.
Hmm.
And then effective date. This is one of the more important parts for me. It always defaults to the expiration date that you put on, but generally I like to quote or work 2 weeks plus out from my um, quote date because it gives me a better rate generally. The problem with that is if somebody expires tomorrow, obviously you can't, but generally I like to work that way if I can.
And one thing I'll add chime in from the chat earlier, I think it was Scott had said that if he knows there's rate increases coming from a carrier that he might like to do on a certain date, that might be a reason to choose a sooner date or one that, gets it in perhaps before that happens, which might be one of the few times when that would be particularly important.
Mhm. Next tab is drivers. This page is generally filled when you get here. There's not a ton. I would operate with a social and driver's license number as much as possible, just for accuracy's sake. You do not, it does not require that though in EZLynx. um, Also, you don't have to remember to chase it down later, which is another thing. So as you get down to the bottom, it starts getting into like SR22s and stuff like that. If generally that's going to push you to non-standard, unless it's like Progressive or somebody who allows it. But generally, I keep this stuff at the bottom blank. I let the carrier kind of figure that out on their end generally, because like good driver and stuff automatically applies. Vehicles. For me, you can quote with a VIN or no VIN. You can do year, make, and model as well. The one thing I do want to point out, just because it's something that can save you time down the road, is I would always work with the real VIN if you can. And the reason being, if I go in here and just plug in a car, what you're going to see is it generates a fake VIN number. Not terrible. It is more accurate with a real VIN. The problem is it bridges that VIN over. And if you don't be aware that you need to update that VIN on the other side, a lot of times the carrier won't throw up an error saying, hey, that's the wrong VIN. It usually just counts the characters and lets you go through, which could be a hassle for servicing down the road. Vehicle use, pretty self-explanatory. You're generally going to work in the pleasure or to from work, to from school. And EZLynx calculates it for you. So that's pretty simple. Ownership type, that's another box that I check because it's orange. Here's one of those ones that's not orange, but I always click yes. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know if it does anything because a lot of times the carrier itself will also ask for if you want its telematics like Travelers or Progressive and stuff. So I always click yes here just in case because I always quote with telematics as much as possible, and I would encourage you to do so as well. Lastly, this part's pretty self-explanatory on a single car, single person, but I do see a lot that it can create a lot of hassle if you have multiple cars and multiple people. Just make sure each car has a primary driver. Reason being is it's a loophole you have to, or a hoop you have to jump through on EZLynx. The carriers don't typically have this anymore because a lot of times agents in the past have kind of abused it and they kind of like allocate percentages to the type of car and stuff. But EZLynx still has this because they probably work with a carrier that we don't that does this. So it's in here. And it is kind of a hoop you have to jump through to make it work and to avoid any unforeseen errors. I would just make sure it's 100% each car and each car has a primary is kind of how that would work out. Incidents, this is an easy page. I don't do anything on the first quote here. I let it just sit dormant until if I go to a carrier and pull a report and get a surprise, I might circle back and re-enter that loss or accident. Reason being is sometimes the client will give you information that's not exactly right, like conviction date or something like that. And then all of a sudden you have a duplicate surcharge. And if that slips past your attention, you might just assume you're not competitive and miss out on a sale. So I try to avoid that at all costs.
And I would
Coverage.
add that just kind of goes to the idea we were saying before, the idea of use EZLynx to steer you to what might be the best company, see how that goes, and then revisit if you need. Sorry, TJ, go ahead.
Oh, no, actually. Coverages. I won't talk to you guys about coverages, I promise. So this is a credit. It's orange. It needs to be answered anyway. So if they own a home, definitely click that. Gives them a credit. Here's that other multi-policy or package discount. You want to check that box to maximize that savings. There are some little caveats here, not really for speed or efficiency, but something to be aware of is towing and labor. I would always click unlimited. All the other ones could possibly land you in a reimbursement style roadside assistance, so I wouldn't do that. Um, Liability not required, obviously that's for storage and then full glass. So this would typically have carrier questions, which we're not going to get into today. Definitely answer the carrier questions accurately. Some of those are going to impact your rate, length of ownership, telematics, some of the residual policy discounts you might be adding down the road or the types of questions they ask. So definitely be accurate on those. Again, we won't get into those today just to kind of like, we don't want this thing to be super long, but generally you're going to have some savings in there as well. Then there's the finish page. Excuse my error. I didn't select any carriers, so it wants me to fix that. But what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to go straight to the home. I'm just going to work my way right into that home quote. And it's the same thing here. Generally, we always try to work within HO5s. If a carrier only does HO3, generally it'll fall back. Just remember to endorse that policy properly. Replacement costs, dwelling, roof, contents, those types of things. Policy info, a lot of this stuff's going to be the same as the auto, so I won't really kind of repeat it, but generally you just kind of want to get a workflow that gets you to your quote faster. You don't want to spend a lot of time spinning your tires in EZLynx. So I do other standard. I'm going to do last day next month, prior carrier. Here it is again. They want to ask if they can do reports. Always click yes. That way you don't have as many errors, and then yes on package. And then I did the 15th of the next month for my effective. Holy mackerel.
Mm-hmm.
I need to go back one. Sorry, folks. This is a live show. So this information right here, underwriting is going to be very important. Obviously, you want to answer that. If there are yeses to some of these, it will generate some additional questions that you want to be accurate on because it can impact eligibility. You don't want to write a policy that might get canceled later. So definitely.
And can I just chime in on this one here too,
Yeah.
especially for the good of our agents here. It's an interesting thing from where I get to sit, and TJ to some degree as well. Sometimes people get themselves into trouble on some of these kinds of questions, right? Like I have seen where agents have had a home declined and canceled by a carrier, come in and requote it with another carrier and say, nope, it's never been declined or canceled by another carrier. It's just not good. It's dishonest. It's not good practice. I know you want to not have something that might make it more challenging to get a good rate, but boy, that can cause some trouble. And then, things like trampolines and pools and things, you need to be asking about that as part of your your process of getting the information, because we've seen agents who thought, well, I'll just let the inspection take care of it if it comes up, or I'll hope that they don't do one or whatever. But these days, most carriers are, because that's such a challenging market out there. And of course, it leaves your customer feeling upset with you if it comes back so different. So whether it's those or a few other defaults like this, do really try to get those things accurate so that you save yourself problems in the future.
Absolutely. We'll go ahead and move on to dwelling info. So this is a big key part of the home quote that a lot of people are like, holy smokes, that's a lot of info. I would kind of live in the vague right here. Get to your information, as much information as you can from Zillow. Just remember things like, let me get there, I apologize. Like construction style. Um, there are some general terms in here. You really don't have to get this exactly right. I just do dwelling every time when I'm quoting an EZLynx, and let the RCE do the dirty work on getting the exact type of construction style. Year built, obviously you want to be pretty close on that because there's
Mm-hmm.
some guidelines there. Square footage. Holy, I live in a giant house, 15,000 square feet, and 2 stories. So I really kind of live in that general area on this part, to kind of speed things up for me. And a lot of a lot of the information you can get off of like Zillow, Trillia, realestate.com, places like that.
While you're filling those out, TJ, there's a question
Mhm.
from Dwayne about templates. And I know that you can set up templates in EZLynx. What I can't remember, what he's asking is, if an agent sets up a template, does that mean every agent can see it or use it, or are templates
I do not believe
specific to the
so.
login?
Believe your templates are specific to the login. I'll be honest with you. I've always avoided templates myself. It does not mean I'm right, but I'll give you the why. Sometimes you get into situations where when you use templates, you miss coverages that they had that you might be underselling on that template, and you could open yourself up to an E&O exposure. So I usually quote apples to apples, so I know I'm right, and then build the value with the savings I have to play with. Is generally my process. However, to answer your question, no, not everybody can see your templates.
Yeah, thanks for that. And actually, maybe related to that, I think, is it on this screen where we get into the updates and stuff? Or maybe that's on, I'm trying to remember if that's on this one or another one. I
Yeah,
have
it's coming
seen,
up, I think.
is it coming up?
Oh, no,
Yeah,
yeah, it's on here.
yeah, later down here. So, and while you're filling some of that stuff out, TJ, I have seen there was an instance where we had an agent who was putting in a default that every home had updates like within the last 5 years. And then there was a pretty bad roof claim on a roof that clearly was over 30 years old. And it created a real problem between that agent and the carrier, who said, what the heck? This was misrepresented as far as what was here. So to the extent that you use templates, you may use them on the things that are not, be careful not to use them on things that are very home specific, and just think, oh, I'll put that in, I'll change it later, or even things like, oh, the template says everybody has a college degree. We have an agent getting terminated for having 95%, almost all their customers as college degree, and only 1 in 4 people in the country does. These people don't have it. They're misrepresenting and stuff. So just be careful that the templates don't accidentally cause you harm.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, TJ.
Now, in the geographical area here, this is where we get into that protection class stuff. And obviously, you want to be accurate about on the carrier side, but some of it's going to be a little bit of guesswork. We did find out last week there's some pretty cool resources for protection class, which is awesome. The Donegal one only works in the Donegal states, I believe, because it's behind the password wall. But you can be more accurate than that than I even thought before. I usually, if I'm estimating on that though, I estimate high, so it comes back to me when it drops on the carrier site. Um, Mine's a 2, but I'm going to put 4. I'm inside city limits and within a fire district. So now this is the update part that Fritz was talking about. Um, some other things that I have seen happen. An example was I was working with an agent and they were playing with some numbers and they're like, if I put it at 19 years, it's $500 cheaper than 20. Um, that, although seemingly innocent, just knocking 1 year off, the carriers will and can see that. So just make sure that you're putting the right information, because it's not worth like that $500 savings on a sale is not worth your overall appointment on things like that. Not saying anybody here would do that. I'm just saying we have seen stuff like that before. It's just not worth it big picture. It's not worth
Hmm.
like risking it all for that moment. Sorry for the dead spots, by the way.
No, it's all right. This isn't an action movie,
Yeah, right.
although obviously it
I
can
don't know if
relate
I'd
to
be
us.
very good in that either.
Yeah.
So down here on the home is the other part where you put the multi-policy discount. I don't know why they separate them in the system. I really feel like it should have one button for both or beside side by side, but they do. So make sure you don't miss that just in case it's a carrier that operates under that discount button. There's some other things here, so definitely check out each one of these. I am visible to neighbor. I do not have man security. And this is the lost part of the home. Again, I leave it blank till I run reports. If I need to, I can circle back and add it.
Now, someone's asking there too about what's the age limit for mature discount.
Oh,
And
that's going to vary from carrier to carrier. Um, that's why I usually leave it blank in EZLynx anyways, because it's usually going, that one will probably auto apply based off of birth date on the carrier site.
oh, that's a good point.
So here's the dwelling coverages page. As I told you guys in the previous wet webinars, I always estimate high here. There's nothing worse than coming in at 150,000 and then the RCE pulls at 300 because all the RCEs are coming in high now. You don't want to have to reel in that extra $150,000. So I generally multiply the square footage of the house by 150, or even right now 175 wouldn't be an absurd number to use just because things are coming in so high.
Hmm.
My particular house, I'll just do 300,000 because we're not bridging anyways. And then I usually make this number match, and then everything else will default as far as like personal property and stuff like that. It'll be based off of the percentage. Personal liability, we always want at least 300,000. Um, and then obviously medical payments and all perils deductible. Wind hail will default to that all perils deductible. I don't
Real
usually
quick,
do much. What was that, Fritz?
I was just going to say real quick comment on the personal liability too. For those of you who maybe haven't looked at it particularly close, it's what's amazing is how affordable that liability is on the home side. And I'm referring back to my farmer's days, but I know for us, the difference between 300,000 and $500,000 was like $3 to $5 a year. Now it's probably more than that now, but the idea is for let's say it's even 10 or 15 to have that extra coverage when, these days crazy things happen and people are suing. Certainly the difference between 100,000 and 300,000, it's not much with most carriers. Real easy way to leave your customers in a much better spot. The cost benefit on it for them is just huge. I
Absolutely.
just thought I'd throw that out there.
Generally with this kind of stuff, I don't really do anything with the mortgagees or any kind of escrow or anything like that. In EZLynx, again, on the carrier side, that's definitely going to matter. I would definitely add it and set it up that way. It's not really going to help us here. Endorsements. So if you want to put additional insurance on the dwelling, you can add 25, 50, or 100% on top of that by with this button here. Some people very interested in identity theft, not others. I always add an ordinance in law if it's a house 15 years or over. You want to bring it up to code in case there were a loss. Another of like the big important ones that we really like to see on our homes because it really helps our clients is obviously replacement cost contents, special personal property, and water backup. I usually look at water backup. Is it like 2 stories? Is it a finished basement? Is it on a slab, a ranch? Like I sometimes I kind of raise and lower that, but generally I hover around $25,000.
I was just going to comment to replacement cost contents. Oddly enough, is one of those coverages that we see sometimes new agents when we have people internally who review your business, make sure it fits what the carriers want. We find people writing policies without replacement cost contents. We hope that most of the time that's an accident because maybe it came from a place where it was just generally included with a certain package, and some carriers packages will. But just be very sure on that because, boy, if you had a customer who had it before and then they come to you and you don't, they're not gonna They're not just going to say, oh, hey, I like you, TJ. It's okay. No, they're going to say, get your checkbook out for at least the deductible on your E&O, right? Or maybe worse. So there's some things there that are important to make sure you look at, especially when you get to the end on the carrier side of things, just so you're not leaving something important off.
I know if I bought a $1,200 TV, I wouldn't want to get a $200 check back. So it's definitely good to have that replacement cost contents on there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are 2 questions too. I'll just chime in
Yeah.
on here, TJ. The first one's from Dwayne again about templates. Says, how do we feel about using templates for mail marketing and getting offers in the mail that he has? I just got one a week or 2 ago myself. I mean, I would say, Dwayne, that would be, Firefly doesn't have a position, good, bad, or otherwise on that. We would just say, just be careful with it, right? Some people's personalities are such that if they had a lead come in, they'd feel like, well, I told them in my flyer that their premium is going to be, $800, and if it's now coming in $1,100, I'm gonna start fudging things so I can come in close to that rate that I had. You guys know yourself, and if that's you, that would probably not be a good idea, right? But if it's one of those things where you've got really clearly on this is just an estimate. I think, when you get those things, I got one from State Farm. It's just an estimate. It's not a final rate. Rates will change and so forth. And that's clear, and that you can stick with that and just do it right when it comes up. I think that could be fine. And then somebody also had asked about what a special personal property do.
Yeah,
And
Max got
then,
it. It
and
just
Max
makes it
got it.
open perils.
Yep. Yep. And let's see, Lewis is saying, I was taught that adding special personal property to home basically makes it an HO5. Is that a valid statement? What do you think, TJ?
Well, I don't, that specific one, I don't believe it makes the dwelling open perils as well. HO5 is open perils across the board.
For everything. And I think you're right on that one. So what you have to be careful on that one, Lewis, is that it would still be named peril for the structure. And because personal property, of course, is referring to the non-structural items. So whole lot better than an HO3. But if you're side by side with it, actually, and here's where you guys could use this. Let's say you are quoting the HO5 and you see someone else has the HO3 with, special personal property. There's a chance for you to say, aha, my quote is better for you because it does this. Well, those are ways where if you know your coverages, it can help you to help customers to see the value in what you're
Gives you
offering.
leverage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now the rest of this page that we're on, the endorsements page, everything from earthquake down, I skip. Just because I like you can schedule personal property pretty easily in the carrier sites. And when I'm in the identifying phase of my best solution, it's not super important yet. I might have to do my umbrellas, motorcycles, everything else anyways. So I would just schedule the personal property on the carrier site, on the winning carrier site. Again, carrier questions. These are going to have carrier specific questions. You definitely want to be accurate on those. This is where the detail is going to matter the most in EZLynx. Some of the other stuff that I've shown you that I've kind of guessed is the carrier is going to kind of iron it out through reporting and stuff like that. Then I'll go ahead and click finish, and I'm going to have an error, and that's pretty much it. Now we've talked a lot. That was roughly 29 minutes. That was an auto and home quote. If with less talking, you could definitely get full bundle quotes in 10 to 15 minutes pretty easily. If you just kind of like block out the parts that aren't really necessary up front. Because like I said, my goal is to get out of EZLynx. If I can shorten my EZLynx time and get into that like fine tuning and selling time, I'm going to be way more productive and my agency is going to be successful.
Mm-hmm. And then for like TJ said at the beginning, for the purposes of today, we're not going to go and actually bridge them and get into the carrier sites because those would all be so different, and some would apply to some states, not to others. One thing, actually, I don't know if I mentioned this to you yet, TJ, but one thing that our operations team has been looking into that you agents might find really interesting is there is a third-party provider called Fenris that what we're looking into is a pre-fill option that you could get for actually maybe we did talk about this actually, TJ, that you could get for like putting in things like VIN numbers and certain driver information and so forth for like less than $1 per time. And what we're trying to work out is, can they just bill that to individual agents individually? Because that would be a billing nightmare from Firefly's perspective. So we'll let you know if that comes to pass. it could be a time saver, but TJ, we were also talking about how it could also be a danger, right? Because sometimes the stuff that pre-fills, I've quoted myself on some carriers websites where they're using pre-fill. And it's like, oh, they're missing one of my kids, or they're including one of my kids who's out of the house, or they're missing one of my cars. So if we add that kind of feature, you need to, it could be cool, but you also would have to be really careful about reviewing what's there. And then let's see, Jane, looks like Janie is asking about some carriers never bring back a quote, always an error. And so with that, I guess, TJ, just thoughts on errors generally? I mean, they would probably need some specific, the specifics of what that
Yeah, some are
situation is.
carrier errors, some are EZLynx errors. Um, it's kind of the nature of the beast, especially right now, because we've got carriers kind of fabricating errors to limit business. Um, if it's one of those and they're pretty vague, I think some examples off the top of my head, like Nationwide's didn't deliver a rate, or not a determination of eligibility. Grange has some. Hartford is limiting business on 5100 business, so they're throwing out an error. Sometimes they give you like an email that you can. Basically, they're making it difficult to get a quote. If you see that, they don't want to rate. The other things are going to be pretty clear. Make sure your effective dates are spot on. Make sure you're clicking yes to credit check. Those types of things. It's going to tell you if it's the vehicle allocation, it'll tell you that it wants a primary on each vehicle. So the more specific things will be errors that you probably overlooked in the quote and you can fix relatively quickly. You can always contact the PL team. We can help you on that. Contact pages in the agent portal. um, but the other ones, there's just not much we can do right now with the hard market. Some of those errors are coming in. They're trying to slow down business. Now, and it's not always an indication of that is a bad risk. It's just they're slowing down business. There's just not much we can do about it right now.
Yeah. Well, another question, a very practical one from Brad, is asking, he asks, and actually, if agents want to chime in on this one, what would you say is the best way to go about getting information from a customer? By asking questions over the phone, asking them to fill out a question sheet and sign it? I know we have agents doing some different stuff. Do you see or discuss that with agents, TJ?
I have. It's really preference. I think the worksheet is a pretty viable one. Some people have portals on their website that people can go in. You can like link it to EZLynx. I have heard good and bad about that one, but generally the client can go to a link, fill out a thing, and it'll show up inside, and then you'll have to kind of spot check it. The problem with that is sometimes they have access to questions that they don't fully understand, and they might do some policy work that you wouldn't have done if you were writing a policy right. So you gotta be careful about that. Some people quote live on the phone. What I always recommend, if you do make a worksheet though, comb through EZLynx, see exactly what you need, and then get them that. Some people have worksheets that are just very cumbersome, asking questions that you won't really need in some instances. Maybe they have one from a past place that they worked at. I would customize one to Firefly and EZLynx. That way, you're getting the information you need. They're not wasting time answering questions they don't need to. So.
Yeah. Well, and related to that too, um, what I think is what I have liked, and it's been a long time since I've done sales myself. One thing I liked about having a questionnaire that I would just fill out myself, of course, nowadays you could do it in a PDF or something like that too, if you wanted, is that it would remind me, I would ask specific things. Do you have a dog? What kind? I would also, as a part of that, do you have trampoline? Do you have a pool? Things that you shouldn't just, well, I'll just put no and we'll hope that they don't and that turns out okay.
Scott
I
Dibba
would
brought
also,
up, just reminded me also, the
yeah.
Canopy Connect. Canopy Connect is,
Oh
I've
yeah.
heard, is a very viable option. You pay for it. It's a pay to play type service, but they will give you information. I don't know what the back end of that looks like. I don't know if it gives you those underwriting type questions or if it's just personal info.
What it would be, by the way Canopy Connect works, we had a separate webinar on this. You can find the information in the agent portal, in the modern agent section. And in fact, there's still a discount for people who want to get it if you're a Firefly agent. And that's all talked about in that webinar. But the idea of Canopy Connect is you have your insured log into their own account with their carrier, and then they grant permission to the software to pull down from the carrier all their coverage information, their limits, their premiums, deck pages. It'll pull down information itself and also documents. And that's really, really awesome. We may actually, I'm trying to think if in that webinar we had an example of how somebody was using it, where he has a video next to the, on a screen next to the form to start filling it out for Canopy Connect. And he's just kind of like pointing to it like for a minute. It's like, come on, go ahead, fill out the form, fill out the form. It's kind of clever, kind of funny. But there are a couple other tools like that. I'm trying to think if is Salt one of those as well, where it can save the customer time if they can just create an account and log in and do that. There's Donnie's mentioning Canopy emails you the deck pages of the carrier. And let's see, we got a few other questions that are here. You guys are doing great. I
Let me
guess,
ask one
yeah,
about
go ahead.
2024 VIN numbers. Yeah, I have run into that, Tammy, and I'll be honest with you, it is a frustration. I would use your make and model and EZLynx to get through the quote because again, that detail's not gonna matter as much in that instance. Generally, I would lean VIN numbers, but in that one, if it's not there, it just isn't. Typically, I have in the past contacted the carrier and let them know, like an underwriter, and be like, hey, I cannot quote this car because the VIN's too new. A lot of times they will help me out, whether they get to their IT team and add it or whatever that looks like.
Hmm.
Generally, there's a way out of that, but it requires some extra steps, and that'll vary.
Yeah. Well, and another question here from Darren is just about, he says, in meeting with marketing reps, get the feeling they want no new business, regardless of how attractive it is. Kind of what do we see here at Firefly? It's not often we see carriers that don't seem to want it at all, at least across the country. We do see where carriers, some are really having to tighten down on what they're doing. An example recently is Branch had a few changes that are going through to say, and actually other carriers are doing this too, right? Where they're saying we need larger down payments to get started. We don't want to write business if it's less than 7 days in advance of when it starts, and things like that, which are interesting to me because these are things that every carrier has in common. The reason there's a discount for early quote is because people who are buying the insurance well in advance, they just tend to have fewer claims, right? Um, it's also true with the down payments. People who can make those larger down payments, they have fewer claims. And so,
Law of
uh,
large numbers.
yeah, it really is. And so I guess what I'm getting at with that is when you see some carriers that are saying, whoa, we have to make some radical changes to do that, then realize that all the other carriers, even if they don't have that as an explicit rule, that is what they would prefer. So, so just be mindful of that kind of thing. So, but going back to your question, Darren, what we see when I see the emails from carriers that are coming in, what we see what carriers, what they really want, and by the way, this should kind of dovetail with what you've seen from us. What do they want? They want package business. They want the home and the auto both, right? They do prefer if they've got the telematics and things like that on there. And so I think, again, if you're not using telematics, you need to start getting comfortable with that and putting that in there. There's a massive discount that a lot of people are leaving off. So they really want package. Monoline scares them. Low limits are terrifying for carriers. People who have state minimums, they just have more claims as a group. And so carriers are saying, we don't want that. We have to rate for it, but we really don't want it because we're getting killed. So I think if you give them the package business with the higher limits, and let's be honest, $100,000 is not much money these days anymore. If you or someone you loved was hit or killed in a car accident, or even just badly injured, would you feel good about 100,000? Or are you gonna say I'm gonna sue that person's butt off, for more? I mean, people need a lot more coverage than they have, and it happens that people with higher limits tend to have lower claims anyway. There's a bunch of stuff going on here. TJ, you were smiling about
Yeah,
something. Was there
I'm
something
chuckling
funny?
because I don't know that Freebird would sound good in my ultra baritone.
Oh, what you're talking about the guitar back there. No, the
Yeah, he
guitar,
said
I do
it's
take those
just
off
on
there
a
and play
webinar.
sometimes. They're not just for show, but I won't be doing a show. I played at a church talent show a year ago, and they didn't boo me off the stage, but they didn't ask me to come back. Um, Another thing I was going to say here too, a couple things. Lewis makes a really interesting point about asking questions. There really is something about, like, I don't know, have you ever gone to buy something and someone makes you this massive recommendation, or charges you a large price, and it's like you don't even know what my situation is. The interesting thing about questions is there's the pro and con. It does take longer, but it really does let you do a better job for somebody. And maybe an example would be if I went into the doctor and they're like, hey, what's your height and weight? How old are you? Do you smoke? All right, here's your prescription. I'd be like, wait, you don't even know. I haven't gotten into what the problem is. It can be a little bit like that,
I know in my experience, eh, whether it be home theater systems, phones, or um, nationwide. Now, nationwide, I was on the phone. I was locked on the phone with my client the whole time, so it was kind of nature of the business. But one of the things I tried to parlay that detail into was a credibility build. Let them know, like, what I'm trying to prevent. I'm trying to get you the right policy now. I don't want you to experience any changes later. So that's why I'm asking all these questions, so I can dot every single I and every single T, so you don't have any hassle in the future.
Yeah. Well, and related to that too, let's say you get into the situation, and this happened to me. I used to get a lot of referrals from realtors and lenders. So people would call, and maybe they call a couple other people, and I'd be talking to them, and I was getting the replacement cost information. And then of course, a lot of that you can get off the internet, and that, by the way, saves you some time. You know, the stuff you can get in your area, you don't have to ask them about. But sometimes they say, well, I just want you to quote, you know, let's say they're buying the house for 225. I just want to quote for 225. That's what everybody else is doing. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to say, I'm glad you mentioned that. Because has anybody explained to you there's a difference between the market value and the replacement cost of a home? Well, what do you mean? And you go through it, and most people, not everybody, but a lot of people say, oh, well, yeah, I absolutely want to be able to rebuild this thing. You know, if something happens to it. And I would say to them, I'm trying to quote this for you right. So we, first of all, you got the right coverage. And secondly, we don't go say, sure, let's issue it. And it comes back, you know, 80, 100,000 higher. And then they feel stuck. So there's some opportunities for that too. And I also see Sylvia has a comment here about larger down payments. Yes, monthly is of course generally going to be lower. And there are some carriers who don't have a problem with monthly, but it is just a fact of the law of large numbers that they find that when there are you know, people who can put more down tend to have lower claims. And I might be wrong about this, TJ, but my guess is if you have a claim, your chances of running into that are lower if you're quoting the package and you've got the higher limits and you are in advance, things that will bring the rate down anyway.
Hmm.
And also, and remember, why did they bring the rate down? Because the companies lose less money on those folks, and maybe puts you in a spot with the carrier that says, hey, this is a great fit. We don't need to require a higher down payment. But if you're going in with the standalone auto with state minimums, you know, carriers are saying this one is already terrifying to us, especially in the market we're in right now. And it is the carriers saying we really don't want that, which I realize is challenging because you know a lot of good people who, you know, maybe that's what they've had, but maybe there's some opportunities to explain to people why maybe 50, 100, or at least 100, 300 would be a lot better. And maybe it opens some doors for them with other carriers. I mean, heck, we've even seen, I don't know if it's still the case, TJ, but there's one major carrier where if you quoted 25, 50, or 50, 100, the rate was more than if you quoted 100, 300.
Yeah, I've run into that a lot. There's a lot of little trick. If you hit like an ineligibility wall, it can be any number of things. It could be the coverages they're coming in with, the carrier they're coming in with, the coverages you quoted. I've seen things become eligible with 100, 300 and a renters as opposed to 5,100 on a monoline. So definitely play with those numbers. Like try to lean into the higher things because, like Britt said, it can also bring your rate down going higher liability limits on an auto, and in some instances even.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Tammy has a related question, says, are there carriers that won't accept a quote on limits less than 100, 300? Saying she thought she heard us say that earlier. And there are carriers that will at least generate an error message for it, right? Because they really
Yeah,
don't
yeah, I
want it.
know Hartford for sure is saying they don't want anything less than 100, 300. Generally, that's their game anyways. I will say I have heard reps and things like that talk about how, yes, we offer it. We really would prefer the 100, 300 baseline or higher. I would say all preferred carriers are going to want that 100, 300 or higher in general. Just 5,100 is going to get eat up in an accident these days. Cars are more
Oh my
expensive.
gosh, yeah. You got
Um,
50,000 in property damage. You can hit one car, never mind get in a collision with, you know, a car and something else. And the insured's going to say, where am I going to come up with all that extra money?
and
Because it's
who
going to
knows?
cost
Like,
more.
I mean, there's some crazy stuff. Who knows who you're going to hit? I read a story about this possible draftee. He was getting ready for the NFL draft. He got into a car accident. The person has like 5,100 or something, and they've ruined this kid's millions and millions of dollars that he might get. So, not even an umbrella will help that. That's obviously the extreme case, but I would rather have 300,000 plus dollars per accident. Um, if I really sat down and thought about the possibilities that could happen as far as like losing
Yeah.
my house and things.
For today, though, I'll just give a big thanks to TJ for all that he's done to put these last 3 weeks of webinars together. We really appreciate everybody's participation in the chat and so forth. And if you have any other questions, you're always welcome to contact us. But the bottom line is just to say thank you. We hope this is helpful. We hope it helps you to write and retain more business and grow your agency. So thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.